if anyone should have known it was going to be a raid that morning, I should have known also. I felt like I could have been caught in that raid. I was there that night, and I felt like if I had laid down, I probably would have been a victim. So I felt betrayed. I felt like I was...
The Black Panther Party, different organizations in the civil rights movement early on were coined as the greatest threat to America by J. Edgar Hoover. They're coined as racial extremists on par with the KKK, and they were coined as terrorists. So the story that I'm going to envelop for you after my introduction will make sense when you understand that that was how white America was being spoon-fed the reality of what these organizations were doing. When you're on the other side of that reality, when you're not being spoon-fed, when you're just fed with experience in this country about how brutal this country really is, you understand a different concept. They may have been coined that, and people may believe that till the day they die, but the reality is the American government is one of the biggest terrorists in the world, and even its own citizens think of them as terrorists. Period. Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. My name is Madison, and this is the Madiswan channel. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button or the notification bell. And the notification bell, so you are notified whenever I post a new video. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and comment down below. And if you are returning, I love you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Please comment and like the video as well so it can do well in the algorithm. Also, if you want to follow me on any of my normal socials, hit the description box and all my socials will be linked down below. So hit me up on TikTok, Instagram, all of those things to just keep up with my daily life and my opinions. Today's topic is another True Crime in Society Black History Month edition, and we are going to be discussing the murder of Fred Hampton and how the movie Judas and the Black Messiah accurately or inaccurately told the story of Fred Hampton and his assassination by the United States government. If you're interested, stick around. So, where do you start with this conversation? There's so many avenues to start with this topic, the topic of Fred Hampton, the topic of the Black Panther Party, the topic of the 1960s and 70s, the topic of the Vietnam War, the topic of classism, the civil rights movement, all of these things. There's so many ways to begin this story. But I guess the best way is a bit of a little interaction. Raise your hand if you were taught about Fred Hampton and or the Black Panther Party in detail in high school. I'll wait.
One eternity later.
It's important to understand that a lot of times the history that we're taught to be true is history that is edited, erased, deleted, mixed around, lied upon in order to create a story where at the end of the day, the United States government doesn't look as bad as it really is, right? And the reason why that works in our society is because people of color, BIPOC people, live a fundamentally different experience of America than the white people. Okay? It is baked into every one of our institutions to treat white people with kid gloves in this very specific way. They don't know the realities, they don't know the truths, because it's not their experience, and it's supposed to be that way. There's a split reality of what the United States actually is and how it shows up historically in different communities, and there's a reason why that America is gatekept, is pined after, is mythologized, because or thought to be aspirational, because that is in America that I will never experience and have never experienced. But by maintaining that concept of what America is in the white consciousness, it is easier for the American establishment to be able to feed lies, to misdirect, and to mislead that population of people in order to not allow solidarity to happen towards the real war, which is a war on class that really needs to be addressed at some point. There is this widespread middle America conception that the Black Panther Party and those that were involved in the Black Panther Party, or people like Malcolm X, or people like, Fidel Castro, people like that are evil terrorist individuals. And those organizations that they support are evil terrorist organizations. And the only way that that kind of propaganda can get dispensed effectively is because there is a split understanding of what America is, what America has done, and how America shows up. And they're being spoon-fed something that isn't real. And we're dealing with the true reality of what it is to be in America, to be unwanted by America, and to be fundamentally an enemy of America based off the color of our skin. The Black Panther Party, different organizations in the civil rights movement early on were coined as the greatest threat to America by J. Edgar Hoover. They're coined as racial extremists on par with the KKK, and they were coined as terrorists. So the story that I'm going to envelop for you after my introduction will make sense when you understand that that was how white America was being spoon-fed the reality of what these organizations were doing. When you're on the other side of that reality, when you're not being spoon-fed, when you're just fed with experience in this country about how brutal this country really is, you understand a different concept. They may have been coined that, and people may believe that till the day they die, but the reality is the American government is one of the biggest terrorists in the world. And even its own citizens think of them as terrorists. Period. So Fred Hampton's story is definitely intertwined and most well and strongly connected to the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party was created by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale in 1966 in Oakland, California. It was created as more of a self-defense force against the brutalities that Black people specifically were being faced by the hands of the police industrial complex. It was an organization meant to try and intercept those interactions and protect its own people, in the hopes of creating a self-policing, a self-governing community that no longer really needed the intervention of the American police establishment. As we know, that's not a reality that could exist safely in a country like this, but that was the goal. Their goal was to empower, was to educate, was to arm our people with knowledge, with confidence, with controlling their own narrative, with controlling their own communities. And that was really the inception of the Black Panther Party. Now, what they are painted to be as a caricature is a different conversation. What you're taught about them is a different conversation. What society wants you to know about them is a different conversation. But that was a goal originally from Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale when they created the Black Panther Party in 1966. I think a lot of people don't understand and conceptualize a lot of the timeline of what was going on in the mid-50s, honestly, post-World War II into the 80s. and the relationship and the changes that were happening within this country. And to put it into context, the Black Panther Party was created 11 years after Emmett Till's death. Okay, Emmett Till was brutally lynched and murdered in 1955 at 14 years old. The Black Panther Party was created in 1966. So just understand that. So a lot of the kids that were children viewing the images coming out of Chicago during Emmett Till's time, Emmett Till's trial, the images that were put on Jet magazine, the televised funeral, the images that were plastered internationally of that little boy's face, they were children during that time. So understand how a lot of these historical events are not just one-offs. The people that were kids during the time of Emmett Till and the start of the civil rights movement were being informed by this historical legacy to when they're adults, they are coming at it and creating the Black Panther movement. There is legacy, there is a chain, there is a cyclical relationship with these historical events. And I've preached this before, but I do not like how history is taught in this country. It is deliberately taught in this very isolated, timeline, linear way, which doesn't make sense. And it purposely doesn't make sense because they're trying to erase the understanding of legacy between historical events and why people were motivated to do what they do. The way the American establishment teaches about the Black Panther Party, and to be real, it has changed over the years. You know, they're less extreme on the communist angle. They're more talking about the food, the free lunch programs, and the free clinics and things like that. They're more open to talk about those parts of the organization nowadays. But overall, what Black Panthers mean and how they're shown in our media historically over the years is to show this kind of aggressive group of people who were cop killers, who were armed, who were extremists. That was the goal. And the reality is, once you understand another person's motivation, you're more able to understand why and how and what informs what they do and why they do what they do. So I think it's important to say that a lot of these people who were starting the Black Panther Party in 1966 and involved in that messaging were children when Emmett Till's situation became mainstream news. So there's a lot of very violent, very aggressive, very scary things that were happening to Black people in America at this time for being targeted, for being lynched, lots of intense imagery that these people were being birthed into, growing up alongside. So it's not so far-fetched that they would be inclined to take a more extreme protective role when it came to insulating the Black community and trying to create this self-governance ability to try and protect us as a community. Just wanted to say that because I think it's important. The reason why they don't teach history like that is to further isolate us from the experience of those who are making history. You know what I'm saying? To make it seem like me, Madison, as a 16-year-old girl learning about the Black Panthers, couldn't possibly do something like that, or couldn't possibly be inspired to do something like that, or what they were doing was so extreme and so crazy and so this and so that, when in reality it was a bunch of people who looked around and said we need to protect our community. And that's relatable. The Black Panther Party started with that mindset, but it evolved over time, and a lot of things started to be informed by communist ideas and classism and the struggle against capitalism in the society. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of times gets kind of blown past. You know, we kind of talk about sometimes how MLK wasn't as popular as we make him out to be during the years that near his assassination, and that's because he was leaning more towards class consciousness and understanding the bourgeoisie versus, the proletariat, and talking about lifting people up on a class basis. And the reason why we're not taught about that is because we live in a capitalist society. So informing kids about the truth behind some of these organizations and the messaging behind some of these organizations, what they were pushing and what they were fighting against truly, it could potentially empower your next Fred Hampton, your next Huey P. Newton, your next Bobby Seale. And we don't need that in this country, as the government would say. So a lot of times we brush past the massive importance of class consciousness, class warfare, equality, workers' rights, the unions, collectivity, things of that nature, socializing and creating solidarity across the fact that there is a real war happening, which is the elite versus the people who are workers, and how we need to pay attention to that war because we have the numbers, we have the labor, we have the things that could completely change this country fundamentally. And so again, the conversation about the Black Panthers, what their goals were started to change, and they wanted to really address some of these inequalities having to do with labor, having to do with classism, having to do with the shortcomings of the American government. It just so happens a lot of the time, the people who are disenfranchised the most, not by coincidence, but by design, happen to be Black or people of color. So a lot of the rights about equality also tie into the class rights. You see what I'm saying? But anyway, so their mindset shifted, their programs started to happen, the free clinics, the free lunches, the free educational places, all of these things, clothing drives, food drives, mutual aid, fundraising, things of that nature started to kind of really take hold in the Black Panther Party. And at its height in the late 1960s, there was around 2,000 members nationwide, which, the way that the U.S. government talked and talked about and said that they were the biggest threat to the American government, but then you realize there's only 2,000 members at its height nationwide, is kind of crazy. And that classification is a result of a self-hating, passing, homosexual, hateful creature, which is J. Edgar Hoover, who was Black and gay and hated himself so much that a lot of his control under the guise of the FBI, he was the head of the FBI for many, many years, was built upon the information he had gathered on people in Washington, which allowed him to fly under the radar with very little oversight from the American government, but allowed him to attack these communities very intentionally, very specifically, in order to disenfranchise them in a very specific way. We will get more into that in COINTELPRO in this story. But yes, J. Edgar Hoover is up all and through this, and he is the reason why the Black Panther Party was classified as, a terrorist organization. So the reason why Fred Hampton was within the crosshairs of the FBI, and I think this is important to say now, early on, is the fact that he had potential. He was killed because of his potential.
I know that. I said it before I went to jail. I'm back now and I may be going again. But if I do go, if you don't say anything else, then the last thing I heard him say was that you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail a revolutionary.
His short time of life, he was only 21 years old, in his short time being the leader of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, he was able to build solidarity amongst other racial groups under the guise of classism. He called it the Rainbow Coalition. And he was able to build solidarity amongst these groups that a lot of times people thought would never happen, in order to push for the agenda of addressing capitalism in the United States and how it was a hardship for most everybody who lived in the United States. No matter what, if you weren't super rich, you're on the losing stick of capitalism, point blank, period. And he was dangerous. He was dangerous on that fact. He was able to underscore and, deinstitutionalize people in this way of pointing out that a lot of these reasons for us not to work together, racially, sexist, things of that nature, were created to create diversity and fractions amongst us as a group of workers, as a group of people who are not in the elite of the American government and the American society. So these were created divisions in order to keep us apart, but we really have more power together because high tides raise all ships. So if we're all fighting against and building solidarity between class, we can work together to kind of deconstruct the systems at play that hold us all together and hold us all down. And by working together, we can take interest and support each other's more specific, specialized issues. Like that, getting to know people, getting to care for people, getting to build that empathy amongst groups that would normally not interact or talk to each other, which is why he was so powerful, which is why he had to go. As I said, because he had to go and because there was a lot of these small groups bubbling up in the wake of the Vietnam War, in the wake of a lot of the volatile nature of what was going on in America post World War II, a lot of these groups of all races, of all types, were bubbling up, specifically Black ones. And because a lot of the Black groups were named as huge terroristic threats and branded as huge terroristic threats to the overall well-being of the American way of life, there was lots of support behind, taking down these groups by middle America. And a lot of Americans bought it hook, line, and sinker. Even some Black people bought it hook, line, and sinker, to be honest. And basically the FBI kind of screwed off a lot of the real work that it was supposed to do, which is, catching serial killers, human trafficking, things of that nature, national crimes that were really happening and really going crazy during this time. They were fucking off those responsibilities in order to focus and be all up in Black people business to really strong arm a lot of these groups into submitting, giving up, and to be frank, it worked. If you see what happened into the 70s and 80s, we'll get into that. That's a conversation for another day. We will get it all up and through that. I have other videos talking more specifically about these times periods. I would check out my Move Philadelphia bombing episode. I can link that below. I would check my episode on where I reacted to the 13th documentary. I will put that below. But this is an ongoing conversation on my channel, but you get what the fuck I'm saying. So just for context, a little background on Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was born on August 30th, 1948 in Summit, Illinois. He graduated his high school with honors in 1966 and then went to a technical developmental college that was run by the YMCA. He then went to a junior college, studied pre-law in order to learn the ins and outs of the law in the United States in order to better help his Black community. Fred basically gets his start doing lots of organization for the NAACP. Then he joins the Black Panther Party in 1968 and moves to Chicago to develop the Illinois chapter, the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party, and this is where we kind of meet him. And I think it's important to kind of say this too, because I really, really hate how the civil rights history is taught in this country about the different organizations and the how simple they put it and how they whitewash a lot of it. But the reality is, and I took an African American history class in college, like 2 different ones in college. I'm not trying to brag, but this is the only place you get this knowledge in a real way. But the civil rights movement wasn't a one big organization that was all on the same page where everyone agreed with what everyone was doing and the means of getting equality and all of that. That wasn't how it ran. And I think people think that, and I think we're taught that. Like, Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat, then Martin Luther King, then Malcolm X, but they're all part of this one dream and organization, and then it fizzles out. Like, that's not what it was. Think of the civil rights movement as a bunch of smaller organizations with different motivations that sometimes overlapped with each other, right? All in the hopes of getting our people to a certain place of equality and all of that, but by different means. So you have the Black Panther Party, who, basically is saying, don't start none, won't be none, but we're going to fight for ours. Then you have organizations like SCLC, the NAACP, that's really anchored in Black Christianity and nonviolence and the Gandhi method, and showing how violent the American government is towards us versus us being aggressive, you know what I'm saying, and that kind of imagery. Then you have SNCC and the Freedom Riders, which is more of a college-based movement where they were organizing within the college spaces and young people were more in charge of that. And a lot of times, all of these organizations, there's much more organizations, smaller and bigger and stuff, but you get what I mean. A lot of times, a lot of these organizations didn't get along, didn't understand, or didn't agree with their means of getting equality for our people. But there's times when they would converge and agree, and there are times when they wouldn't. You know what I mean? But sometimes their motivations are overlapped and sometimes they didn't. And that's the truth. The reality is there are different groups with different motivations, with different goals, with different hopes. And sometimes they worked together, sometimes they didn't. And that's just what the tea is. Not everyone got along. Ella Baker famously hated Martin Luther King because she thought he was hella sexist, and which is a conversation for another day, but you know what I'm saying. So what we're taught and what you may have been taught over the course of years in high school in this country about the footnote that is the African American history and experience in this country that we're taught in a very condensed amount of time, in a very condensed way, is not accurate. There were many different people inspired by the time, inspired by the movement, inspired to create change. There are many different ways, there are many different realities, and the Black Panther Party fit amongst many. So for Fred Hampton to start in the NAACP, but then maybe understand and realize that his personal morals and personal beliefs about equality and how to get there were more in line with the Black Panther Party, that happened a lot, and that wasn't like a crazy occurrence. It's something that should be noted, though, that there was a difference of opinion. And so he changed, and he became one of the most prolific Black Panthers to this day. For the reason why Fred Hampton is such a prolific name, even though, his reign as the head of the Black Panther Party in Chicago was very short, and he was very young, was because of his potential, what he proved he could do, which was building solidarity amongst groups that were also being disenfranchised by the United States government, who weren't just Black, but organizing on the concept of class. So one of his most notable achievements was doing that and creating solidarity amongst the different, street gangs or organizations in Chicago with different motivations. And some of those organizations were the APPP, the Young Patriots, and the Young Lords in Chicago, and they organized under this kind of guise of classism, and they created the Rainbow Coalition and this and that. But you get what I'm saying. It was more dangerous because he wasn't operating under only Black rights. He was operating under, we're all being fucked by the government, let's organize over class and get to know each other, build solidarity, and maybe your problems will become my problems and my problems will become your problems under the guise of fighting under class. So yeah, So the craziest part is that moment of organizing and convincing these different groups from different backgrounds to create and build solidarity under class was a televised moment. And because it was televised, the right people were watching it, who were getting inspired by the possibilities of organization and activism, and the wrong people were watching it, and they were seething under the fact that this young man was cracking the code on how the United States government, the greediest government, was able to extract so much labor from its people by brainwashing them and creating these fake culture wars amongst them, when in reality they're just a distraction, and the real people that we all need to fight are, Elon Musk and such, and Jeff Bezos and stuff. So let the white American establishment tell it, but Fred Hampton's story ends like this. In the wee hours in December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton was killed in a raid that was meant to expose the fact that this extremist organization had guns, and the local authorities were tipped off to this, and he just happened to be killed in that crossfire. But the police, the establishment, the American government did its job in protecting white citizens from these extremist people who were harboring all these guns and weapons and all of this and that. That's the official story. Is that the truth? No, and we'll get into that more right now, but I just want you to understand that is how the story was immediately reported like, and how in subsequent years it is still kind of talked about like, but that is a very sanitized, very edited down version of what happened. So let's get into the truth, shall we? So remember, the FBI has already started, my notes. At this point, the FBI has already been very successful in its branding of what the Black Panther Party is, who these people are, who people who are wanting civil rights are like. They are communists, trying to disrupt the status quo and make America unsafe, and they're being successful at pushing this narrative. Now, as I've set up for you before, Fred Hampton was a person of interest because of his potential of organizing under the anti-capitalist guys. So the question becomes, how far is the United States government willing to go to, quote unquote, protect itself from these extremist terrorists? Well, let's ask you that question. What do you think? Do you think the United States government would completely bulldoze past all the roles and rules and regulations and laws they've put in place in order to take out said threat? Do you think they would completely uproot the idea of American law and order in the sole purpose of attacking a specific, very small, quote-unquote, threat to the American experience? What do you think? Because overwhelmingly, the papers and the evidence that were declassified about this time frame and about the coordinated attack on the Black Panther Party and Fred Hampton in particular would point to the fact that they are willing to not give a fuck. They don't care. They're going to bulldoze past any kind of rule, law, or whatever. They're going to completely corrupt the American rules and laws and justice in this country that we are supposedly given as citizens of this country in order to, meet their goal, which was to end the further inspiration that Fred Hampton could have on his community and others. And part of that was this man named William O'Neill. And we're going to get into his story right now. I think it's just important to insert his story really quickly. But I'm going to be inserting clips about this because in reality, this man did an interview and stuff like that. And William O'Neill is effectively who Lakeith Stanfield was in Judas and the Black Messiah. And this is where a lot of my criticisms come with that movie, because they didn't play into, to me, the predatory nature of the FBI, as well as the youth of William O'Neill and how he was manipulated and things like that. So we're just going to tell that story and straighten that story out right now. How William O'Neill became an informant for the FBI. Now, I want to pause here and just say this was commonplace. There was a large percentage at a point of the Black Panther Party that were informants. There was a large percentage of Malcolm X's entourage that were informants. There was a large percentage of the people around Martin Luther King who were informants to the FBI. So what happened to Fred Hampton happened to a lot of people, and what happened to Fred Hampton wasn't unique in any way. It's just used as a unique situation, but this was commonplace when it came to how the FBI moved during those periods of time through COINTELPRO. So here's William O'Neill's story, very shorthand off the dome. William O'Neill was in his late teens. Him and a friend decided that they wanted to do something reckless and wanted to take a joyride. So they stole a car in Chicago and drove around for a while. Then they decided they wanted to visit a relative across state lines. So they take a stolen car across state lines, which is a federal crime. They end up visiting said relative, staying and fucking around that, state for a while. They end up going to a pool hall, and at said pool hall, they are required to give their governmental names and numbers in order to enter. They go, they play pool, they give their names, and then when they leave, they get into a car accident in a stolen car that they took across state lines. So what do? They hit and run. They leave the scene, they flee the scene, they stay low in that state for a while, then they get a bus to go back to Chicago. Now, months pass. Mind you, he's 17, 18 at this point when he does that. Mind you, he's young. Months pass, and he gets a call to his house from the FBI, who basically, and his name is, I think, Roy Mitchell, this FBI agent that he ends up working with. But Roy Mitchell calls his house and is like, yo, I know what you did last summer. No, I'm just kidding. But, basically, I know what you did. I know everything about the case. I have a lot of evidence to be able to take you in. This is a federal crime, blah, blah, blah. But I have a way, for this to be not a reality, for you to be taken into custody. And, I will, if you do a favor for me, then, we can kind of call it square kind of thing. So, of course, he's young, he's black, the FBI just called him and told him exactly what he had done months prior. He's scared, he doesn't want to go to jail, and they manipulate that. And so he basically agrees to this unspoken favor and, hangs up. A few months later or a month later, he gets a phone call from Roy Mitchell again, basically calling in the favor and saying, hey, the favor is I need you to join the Black Panther Party in Chicago now. And so basically, he does that. He takes a bus in, joins the Black Panther Party, and joins the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party when it's just beginning. So this is like an amalgamation of timelines. So this is around 1968 when Fred Hampton comes to create the Illinois Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. So there's not a lot of people filling positions. There's not a lot of leadership. It is very new by the time William O'Neill walks through the door and says, I want to volunteer. So because he's pretty tech savvy and, the people who were Black Panthers at the time who were, a part of the early chapter, basically felt like the office building that they had rented for their organization was not secure. And William O'Neill was very handy with security and electronics and stuff like that. He became the head of security for the Black Panther Party Chicago chapter, which is a big role. And eventually as more people started to volunteer, as they got more donations, at its height, there was like 500 members, I think, in the Chicago chapter. he was having people work under him when it came to security of their spaces where they would plan meetings and all of that kind of thing, right? He was basically the head of security detail. So, what, unbeknownst to anyone else that's working with him in the party, William O'Neill is informing everything he's seeing, every person he's talking to, the names of these people in this movement, where they're located, if they bought guns, if they did anything illegal. He's bringing all of that information back to the FBI, right? And so from the very, very beginning of the inception of the Black Panther Party, Chicago chapter led by Fred Hampton, William O'Neill was there. He was always there. He was always an informant. He was always in the mix, telling the FBI exactly what was going on. So, and it's a complicated conversation about shooting bail to him, and it's a conversation in the Black community as well. But it's this concept of like, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I screwed up. I don't want to go to jail. This is the avenue for me not to go to jail. And at that point in time, he himself, William O'Neill, spoke in this interview about himself not being very political. He didn't really know much about the Black Panther Party at that point when he started. He only knew that Huey P. Newton was in jail and facing, life in prison and stuff like that for murder. And so, he wasn't really a political person. He grew up middle class, and middle class for Black people at that time meant that you interacted with a lot more white people, and a lot of times you were not as down with the people as you think you would be, because our struggle was so blatant. But there's a lot of class divide within the Black community. So he grew up middle class, he grew up apolitical, and in his community, being a police officer, being connected to any kind of governmental entity was a respectable job. So to him, as a 17, 18-year-old kid being put into this very intense position, he thinks, you know what, I'm making good out of a situation that was bad. I'm actually working with the FBI. I'm helping the FBI, because he was informed under different circumstances, you know what I'm saying, about how he grew up and what the FBI really is versus what it's portrayed to be, So he goes in, he begins to infiltrate, and it was already completely corrupted, the Black Panther Party in Chicago, from the beginning, because William O'Neill was there from the beginning. Now he starts becoming an informant to Roy Mitchell, who is an FBI agent, and to him, he's just kind of like, they would just ask me what I did that day, who was there, anything like that. It was very benign. In his words, he would go and meet up with this FBI person like once a week at a bar, and he would talk to him for 15 to 20 minutes about what he saw that week and what they did that week, and the FBI agent would mostly listen, and that was basically the extent of him being an informant. Now, this is very important because William O'Neill becomes the linchpin for what ends up happening to Fred Hampton. Over the course of the 16 months that he was a part of the Black Panther Party chapter in Chicago, and working very close with Fred Hampton, as well as being an FBI informant, he was able to pass the FBI the exact specs and of Fred Hampton's apartment, how many guns were in there, what kind of way the apartment was watched and surveilled, and what the security team did, what they did inside the apartment. So he was passing off lots of information, and Roy Mitchell, I must say, played the part really well and kind of kept him thinking it was more of a casual thing, like, I just want to know what they're doing, like, kind of thing. According to William O'Neill, he knew that a raid was coming and imminent, but what he was told was that it was more so a raid on the fact that these people had guns illegally, and it was like supposed to be a non-violent raid to get the guns and not end up happening in what it ended up happening. But we'll continue with this.
That got killed. I knew it would be a raid, but I didn't feel like anyone would get killed, especially not Fred. You know. So, yeah, I was shocked. I felt a little. I didn't feel like I had done anything. I didn't walk in there with guns. I didn't shoot him. The FBI didn't do it. I felt somewhat like I was betrayed. I felt like if anyone should have known it was going to be a raid that morning, I should have known also. I felt like I could have been caught in that raid. I was there that night, and I felt like if I'd have laid down, I probably would have been a victim. So I felt betrayed. I felt like I was.
So on the night of December 3rd, 1969, everyone is at the apartment where Fred Hampton sleeps. And, mind you, William O'Neill kind of knows something's in the air, something's going to happen. What is rumored is that William O'Neill gave Fred Hampton some drugged food and drink with barbiturates so that he wouldn't wake up throughout the whole process of this raid happening. But it's often and widely talked about how William O'Neill may or may not have drugged Fred Hampton that night. William O'Neill was the security that night, but at 4 a.m. when the police department came and were tipped off about the existence of guns and who was in the apartment, they came in guns blazing at 4 a.m. and it just so happened that William O'Neill was no longer on security at that point in time. So they come in guns blazing at 4 a.m. on December 4th. William O'Neill is nowhere to be sight, but the security guard that was keeping watch over the apartment basically was the first victim, and basically the police come in, shoot him initially, and as he lay dying, he shoots his rifle towards the police. That was the only shot that was shot from the Black Panther side. The rest of the shots were all the Chicago police. After that, they basically directed their guns to Fred Hampton's room and just lit it up with a bunch of bullets. Meanwhile, his 8-month pregnant wife was laying next to him, and basically he was murdered next to his wife. She survived as well as their baby, and that's basically what happened.
I looked up and I saw bullets coming from, it looked like the front of the apartment, from the kitchen area. They were, pigs were just shooting. And about this time, I jumped on top of the chair. He looked up. Looked like all the pigs converged at the entranceway to the bedroom area, back bedroom area. The mattress is just going. You could feel bullets going into it. I just knew we'd be dead, everybody in there. When he looked up, he didn't say a word, and he didn't move, except for moving his head up. He laid his head back down to the side like that. He never said a word, and he never got up out the bed. The person who was in the room, they kept hollering out, "Stop shooting, stop shooting. We have a pregnant woman or a pregnant sister in here."
Fred Hampton was murdered in his sleep next to his pregnant girlfriend, 8-month pregnant girlfriend. 2, he was 20, they were 20 and 21 at this point in time. So these are young people with their life ahead of them. They were starting a young family. And because of Fred Hampton's potential, because of the freaking huge target that J. Edgar Hoover had put on his back, he was targeted and murdered in cold blood in his sleep on December 4th, 1969 by the Chicago police. Now you may ask, the police and the FBI are different entities. Why are you blaming the FBI? Well, the reality is it's all connected, because the FBI was shrugging off their real responsibility of national security and things of that nature by focusing and using all of their resources for something called COINTELPRO. And that's something that we can talk about. I'm sure you've heard about it in your history classes slightly as it relates to Martin Luther King getting that, getting his phone tapped, and, evidence of him cheating being sent to his wife in the hopes that it would make him kill himself and all that kind of thing. Like, that's a whole mess, but that was COINTELPRO. But basically, COINTELPRO was this, like, dark ops organization within the FBI led by J. Edgar Hoover that operated completely outside of the realms of the law and with completely no oversight by the American government. And they would do things like tap people's phones, go through people's mail, follow people, bug their homes, all sorts of things like that, completely harass people in order to kind of intimidate people into doing what they wanted and break up movements that were anti-war or deemed communist. It started off as something that was to fight the communist bug in the United States and to weed it out of the United States, but it quickly morphed into an anti-black, anti-capitalist, anti-Semitic, anti-whatever organization that was basically used as a catch-all to spy on people that J. Edgar Hoover thought would be a threat to the United States, but in reality was just trying to muscle his control to kind of quell these groups down. Now, because of COINTELPRO, that is how they had all of the information on Fred Hampton. That is how, by COINTELPRO, that's, how William O'Neill was being used as an informant under the guise of COINTELPRO for Fred Hampton. And so, all of the information that was being given to the FBI through William O'Neill and other informants in the Black Panther Party were also being given to the local police, who then carried out the actual hit job, which was to murder Fred Hampton. You see what I mean? So that the FBI could kind of remain out of it and no one could really connect the two. This all eventually comes out in 1971 once these papers are declassified, but that is just a short rundown. So I beg you to answer this question. When an organization that is supposed to be for the safety of all American citizens, that is supposed to be getting into sex trafficking cases and murder cases and serial killers and things that are happening across state lines and kidnappings and things of that nature in order to keep the average American citizen safe, right? An organization like the FBI that's supposed to do that, right? They're using all of their resources in a black ops, secret, top secret, super classified fucking within inception of a group organization called COINTELPRO, where they're doing literally the most illegal things they can do in order to choke out any activism within the black community, within any anti-capitalist communities, within any BIPOC communities in general, overusing its power, completely bulldozing between law and order and what the effectiveness of these organizations and the checks and balances that are established between these organizations in order to protect the American people. What does that say to you when they're operating completely without the oversight of the American government, in total secrecy, with all the financing and the ability to do so? What does that say to you? Who's the terrorist, would you say? Who's the terrorist? Who is terrorizing who in this situation? Think about it. So after Fred Hampton was murdered in cold blood by the Chicago police, basically as a result of William O'Neill being an FBI informant under COINTELPRO, basically the Black Panther Party effectively starts to disband at that point. According to William O'Neill in an interview he did after the fact in the 80s, basically 300 members of that chapter never showed up again after Fred Hampton was murdered by the FBI. But they basically all said that he was murdered for his potential of what he could potentially do in terms of changing the world and organizing under the guise of class. So in the apartment where Fred Hampton was murdered, there was a total of 19 guns and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. basically the only gunshot from the Black Panther Party, even though they kind of characterized this as a shootout that was shot against towards police, was from that dying security person. All the other shots were from the Chicago police. Around 83 to 90 shots were fired into Fred Hampton's room and into the apartment in general by the Chicago police, and only one from the side of the Black Panthers was shot because the man was shot dead by the police. So after all was said and done in regards to the shooting, Fred Hampton was obviously shot fatally, and then another Black Panther Party member named Mark was shot fatally, who was a security guard at this time that the police came. So yeah, basically, that is the story of how Fred Hampton was murdered in cold blood by the United States government, completely assassinated and fabricated, in William O'Neill's hand in that situation. Now, if you're curious about what happened to William O'Neill, here's what happened. So all of this happened in 1969, and William O'Neill was able to live comfortably in Chicago until 1973, after those documents were declassified, and he was named as the informant that basically caused Fred Hampton's murder. He was shuttled into the witness protection program and shuttled to California under the name William Hart, where he worked and lived for many years, and then he eventually came back to Chicago in 1984. Now, the interesting part about this is in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a show called, I forgot what it was called, Eyes on the Prize 2. And it was basically this kind of, I don't know if it was PBS who was interviewing people or whatever, but they picked specific people to interview and talk about their specific story. And William O'Neill was someone that they chose to interview during that time.
Directly to the office, and the office was empty, unusually empty. It was one girl sitting behind the desk, and she was on the phone, and there was just no people there. And I walked in, I guess it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I walked in, and I was waiting on her to get off the phone to ask, what was up. And I saw a copy of Sun-Times laying there, and had his picture on there, and had Panther leader slain on it. And boy, I felt bad. I felt just, and I remember walking out of the office and looking through a little clearing over on the next block, which was right in front of the Monroe Street address, and seeing a lot of police cars over there. And at that time, Bobby Rush came to the office. He had just come from over there, or maybe the coroner's office. In any case, we walked back over there, and we both were speechless. We just walked through the house and saw what had taken place and where he died, and it was shocking. That was that was I think it was that morning that I began to feel that I felt really, everything that I had done flashed before me. I began to put it all together, pretty much. And I couldn't believe it. It was just shocking. And that he had died.
What did you begin to put together?
The information, the information leading up to the raid, the attitudes, and the whole thing. You just felt it in the wind. You knew something bad was going to happen. I felt like it would be a raid. I knew it would be a raid. 2 police officers had got killed. I knew it would be a raid, but I didn't feel like anyone would get killed, especially not Fred.
And he interviewed for that Eyes on the Prize special. And on Martin Luther King Day, 1990, he ended up unaliving himself and killing himself by walking into traffic because, according to his uncle, he was so guilty and so burdened by what he had done to Fred Hampton. Mind you, if you watch the interview, you kind of get a little bit of a different take, but I don't know if he's kind of playing it up to try and be like, I fully stand by my position. But after he was found dead, and his uncle basically spoke out and basically said he was tortured by this information for a long time and tortured by what he did and fully regretted what he did to the Black Panther movement and the Black Panther Party movement, as well as Fred Hampton's life. And he really wore that heavily. Now, I guess that's kind of as good as a place as any to end that story. Like I said, a lot of these stories just kind of end, and they end kind of sadly and disappointingly. But the story of Fred Hampton is a story that isn't widely talked about historically, but it's an important story, as you can see, that encapsulates the time period so purely. It talks about the Black Panther Party, it talks about civil rights, it talks about classism, it talks about the Vietnam War. There are conversations about solidarity, there are conversations about FBI informants, and it's kind of amazing to me that it's not a story that's more widely told in history in the United States, in American history, because it really is a really good cross segment of what was going on at the time. And there's so many different intersecting lines that have to do with Fred Hampton and his story and his death and his murder. I also think it's one of those things where, you can't really sugarcoat this. The United States government had this guy assassinated, had this guy set up and murdered him for blood, and William O'Neill was but a pawn in the game of that. Do I think he did wrong by his people? That's a big question. I would say that he was trying to save himself, and a lot of people, though, they may talk a big game without ever having to face those circumstances, may have chosen the latter. So, when it comes to this conversation about snitching in the Black community, you can see why it's so important because of this history. But at the same time, a lot of people who would be facing years in federal prison for stealing a car and all of these things would probably take the easy road out, even if it meant selling someone else down the river. Now, as you know, I put clips of his interview into this video, but what I found most interesting about this interview, and you can watch kind of the full thing, I'll link that down below as well, but you can watch kind of the full thing on YouTube. But when he was asked about if he regretted this, when he was asked about all of these things, he kind of was emotional about the fact that it led to Fred Hampton being murdered, but he also felt really betrayed by the United States government, and kind of this was him realizing, because he was so young at the time, what game he was really playing. This wasn't just a game of telephone where I come and tell you secrets and you tell me secrets and we're whispering in a corner and you're writing it down. These secrets had consequences. What he was saying to these people had heavy consequences, which led to people dying. And I don't think he understood the gravity of the situation. He also kind of really was sobered up to the reality of his position as a pawn. He kind of explains in that interview, because he thought in his mind, I'm working with the FBI, I'm a partner, I'm helping them. How prestigious is that? Because where he grew up, that would be a prestigious thing. In reality, he was realizing that he could have been in that apartment because they never told him what time or when they were going to raid. He just happened to not be on the scene and had shifted his responsibilities to Mark, but that very well could have been him. He could have been shot dead. He could have been shot up in that apartment, and the FBI informant who was his friend or his partner who he was being in deep cover for actually wouldn't have cared less, because he would have put him in that position. And the fact that he didn't get warning was a sobering thing for him, realizing the truth that you weren't a partner in this. You were being used, you were being manipulated because of the United States government stranglehold on your future. And I think that reality really fucked with him, which is sad and whatever on all accounts. But Fred Hampton's story is an amazing story. It is a story of potential. It is a story of strength. It is a story of empowering the youth, because the reality is they like to gaslight us and make us feel like we don't know what's really going on, we don't know the truth, we've never experienced real life because we don't have kids, or we're not retired, or haven't worked 40 years at a thankless job, and all of that kind of thing. But the reality is, I think we see it for what it is in its purest form, and I want us to be inspired by his story to understand that you are 100% capable of doing and making a difference. You have the power, is truly in the people. The power is to the people. Power to the fucking people. We are the people. We are the youth. We are fully smart enough and capable enough to create systems in order to combat what is happening to us in this day and age, whether it be racially, sexism, classism, and all of those other isms, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, all of the stuff. We have the means of production to create a world that we want to see, and you should be inspired by Fred Hampton's story, because he was onto something, and it's time for us to continue that legacy. And on that note, my name is Madison. This is the Madiswan channel. This is my Black History installment of True Crime in Society. Next week, I will have a video, but I will be going live, and I will be giving you another installment of YouTube tips for a lazy bitch for my besties on this channel. I have a little series. I have one video out, so if you go to my live tab, you will see that I have one video called 5 things you need to know before you start a YouTube channel. But I go live and I talk about it. It's my new thing. It's my new venture that I do kind of on the side, because I learned a lot during my first year as a YouTuber that I wanted to inform and help people and inspire people to let them know that they can do it too. So next week, no video, but we'll be going live. So if you want to talk to me, ask me questions about YouTube, ask me questions about whatever, even ask to even have some of your stories be discussed. If you want to recommend stories for me, point me in the right direction, all of that kind of thing, you can do that on that live. So I'll be going live on Thursday, and more information about that live will be on my community tab. That being said, all my socials are in the description. If you are new here, thank you for watching this video. I hope you watched all my ads. That is very helpful for the channel. Please like and comment down below on this video, because it is very important to the well-being of this channel, and helping with the YouTube algorithm and its funky ways. If you are returning, love you. You know the drill. You had better watch my ads, like and comment down below, and share the video to someone that you might think might like it. Without further ado, Black Lives Matter and Free Palestine till it's backwards. Love you guys.